Hey there, powerful soul. Welcome to this conversation on restoring your feminine self-trust. Now, before I get started, I want to ask in advance for your grace. You may hear some sounds. I'm sitting by a window and I hear my neighbor's toddler being a bit rambunctious. And so please forgive me if there are external sounds entering our conversation. But thank you in advance for your grace and your patience. Just taking a moment to presence ourselves here for this conversation. And so whether you are driving or walking or sitting or working, I invite you to take a moment of awareness for presence. And let's begin. I want to begin this conversation by inviting you into releasing the distortion and the lie of being behind or being too late. Whether you are experiencing something happening inside of your womanhood, inside of your relationships, or inside of your leadership, this lie, this distortion that you are behind or that you are too late is actually an identity insight. An identity insight is that divine intelligence that informs us of when we are entering what I call God's transformational cocoon, entering the kingdom chamber for an initiation on an identity level to be transformed by the Almighty. And oftentimes when we are having these thoughts or these unconscious crippling beliefs or these internal narratives and dialogues, such as it's too late, I am behind, I missed my time, I messed up, I made too many mistakes. And it's actually an identity insight signaling to you that you are right on time. And everything that you have been desiring as a woman, lover, and leader is on the other side of this initiation of your identity. Now, specifically, we're going to have a conversation around restoring your feminine self-trust because that is a key component in identity level transformation, especially as powerful, deep feminine leaders. It is paramount to not only restore your feminine self-trust, but to recalibrate your system to your self-trust, where you have repatterned and rewired the internal beingness that has caused you to turn left when your system said to turn right, or to pause when that divine intelligence, that sacred guidance by God said, wait. But there was that hurriedness and that rushing pressure inside of yourself that wanted to go ahead of God. And there's consequences when we go ahead of God. When we go ahead of God, it causes us to go into a false timeline. And when we go into a false timeline, we are essentially going down a path that appears as if it is not in alignment with our destiny, that is not in alignment with the plans God preordained and predestined for us. When we are on this false timeline, things start to look a little chaotic. We may start to engage in dysfunctional patterns to cope, and it could look like mayhem. Now, during this time, I have discovered that there is a series of events, there are a series of choice points that we have made that has landed us here, not only through our rushing and our hurriedness of trying to go ahead of God and experiencing the consequences of that. Also, there has been choices that were made where we went against ourselves, acts of self and soul betrayal. And the initiation of this entire experience that I'm describing to you in this conversation usually is catapulted by what is perceived as an external betrayal, a betrayal inside of our lives, inside of our relations, inside of an encounter, inside of an experience. And I have discovered on this journey called life that when we are experiencing a betrayal outside of ourselves, it is mirroring to us the betrayal that was first committed within ourselves, because as above, so below, as within, so without. These are the sacred spiritual universal laws that has created all that is. And so when we are experiencing what is perceived through our natural physical eyes as someone backstabbed me, someone betrayed me, someone compromised my trust, and then noticing where you get into this pattern of blaming and shaming outside of yourself without looking and examining, where did I stab my own back? Where did I go against myself and betray my soul? Where did I compromise my own self-trust? When I had this remembering during the experience that I had recently, well, it was not recently, it was a few years ago, but it seems recently. It was a few years ago inside of my business as a feminine leader. That initial programmed pattern of blame and shame surfaced. Of I wanted to blame and I wanted to shame and I wanted to point the finger outside of myself without looking at the three that were pointing back at me. And I remember the bitterness and the resentment that started to settle within me. And I returned to my center. I remembered, oh, as within, so without, as above, so below. I am experiencing the recreation of what was already created within me. There was a pattern, there was a dynamic, there was a relationship that I had with myself that life is now mirroring and reflecting back to me. Do I have the courage to look at the reflection in the mirror, even though it's painful, even though it stings, even though it hurts, and look at it without shaming myself, without judging myself, without condemning myself, without beating myself up, and without blaming and shaming the other? Can I look at the reflection in the mirror and see where I stabbed my own back? Where I said yes when my body said no? Where I acquiesced to appease another and to go against myself? Where I betrayed myself and the nudges from my soul that were guiding me? But because I didn't trust in God's timing and divine pacing, I wanted to be in a hurry and get somewhere faster. There's this phrase that I used to say inside of my work, and occasionally it comes back up as it is now, where there are these versions of ourselves that sometimes likes to grab the ladle and stir the pot because we're telling God, you're not moving fast enough. Let me help you out. There's times where these versions of ourselves wants to get into the driver's seat and push God to the passenger seat, and we drive and we push on the gas, and sometimes we don't realize we're unconsciously pushing on the brakes at the same darn time because, God, you're not going fast enough, or you're not going in the direction I think we should go in. Let me take the wheel and drive. Let me take the ladle and stir. Let me be in control. Let me be in the driver's seat. And for those of us who were parentified children, who were even the firstborn daughters or the first of many, who have carried the load of the responsibility for not only ourselves, but for many others throughout our lives, that pattern starts to distort our relationship with God, where we want to do God's part. We want to drive. We want to go in the way we think we should go in. We want to go at the pace we think we should go in because we have an agenda. We have a will and a way that we think is the will and the way. There's scripture in the sacred text that says that there is a way that seemeth right unto humans, but God knows all. God is Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. God knows all things. But in our finite human logical, linear thinking and perceptions, we sometimes forget that we are not the only ones co-creating this reality and this existence. We are not the only ones experiencing these dynamics and co-creating these dynamics. And so when that version of ourselves wants to be in control and to drive and be overly responsible, we have to examine where this is coming from. And when we don't examine where this is coming from, we fall prey to collapse and spiraling, which typically looks like burnout, exhaustion, depletion, overwhelm, which are all symptoms of overfunctioning. And I believe overfunctioning is us trying to do God's part. And so what I have found is that when we are in those patterns and those dynamics within ourselves, and they're being mirrored back outside of ourselves, we start to do these strange things in attempts to clean up what we perceive as a mess, the energetic messes that are being made by our misalignment. And one thing that I noticed was that we turn our gaze outward, externally, because the self-trust has now been fractured. And so we're uncertain, or we're feeling unsure, and we're not quite connected to that inner knowing of, where am I to go? What am I to do? And so we go outside of ourselves seeking that. And typically this doesn't look like seeking a guide, such as myself, seeking a mentor, seeking a leader, seeking someone who can support us through this identity level initiation we are experiencing. We go to sources, we go to whatever is out there, and there's a plethora of things out there in the world today that is not going to support us and meet us in our depth and support us with the identity level transformation that our souls are calling us to, and that is required for us to course correct and to realign. And so we turn our gaze outward and we're externally focused. And I remember when I did this in my business. One moment, I love to take a sip of tea. Excuse me. When I did this in my business, and we do this as ambitious feminine leaders because we're advanced action takers who are obsessed with growth. We are willing to do what it takes to make it happen. We attempt to outwork our paradigms, outwork our unconscious beliefs, outwork our identities that are usually expired and outdated and antiquated in lieu of strategies. While I have nothing against strategies, we need both and inside of our co-creations in life, love, and leadership. I bring strategic approaches inside of my work. The types of strategies that I'm speaking of are usually strictly strategy with no spiritual alignment, with no energetic refinement, with no nervous system attunement, with no initiation of your identity on a soul level, which is all part of the work that I do. And I found myself doing this in my business as a guide. I know better. Why am I not doing better? When I worked with the late Bob Proctor years ago, he explained this concept about knowing better but not doing better. And he calls this the knowing doing gap. I have called it the awareness action gap, because it's not that we're not aware. We're very self-aware. And it's not that we're not willing to take action, but there is something in the middle that is causing our awareness and our action to not be in alignment. And so that's why we need the awareness with aligned action, not just action. And so for me, I found in the gap with knowing what to do and not doing it was we are trying to do it all on our own. And alignment comes from God. Alignment comes from Creator. Alignment comes from the I am that I am. Alignment comes from the Holy One. And when we are trying to chase alignment through man-made strategies and man-made approaches, although they work when they are in alignment, they tend to not work so great when there's no God in it. I think about the scripture where it talks about being the salt of the earth. And when we are the salt of the earth, there is a seasoning that our essence and our frequency and our energy adds to all of our interactions and our encounters. When you don't season your food, it misses flavor. It lacks flavor. God is our salt. And so when we try to fix our self-trust with these external gazes of chasing strategies of how can I fix my marriage? I did this in a season that Mr. and I were navigating growing pains in our union, couples counseling, communication templates, relationship courses. And none of those things had God in it. They were great information. They were practically great information. And I utilize those types of informations inside of my work. But without the spiritual alignment, it's dry. There is no sustenance to it. There is no flavor to it. There is no seasoning to it. It's performative, which I see a lot of ambitious feminine leaders engaging with right now is performative behaviors inside of their lives, inside of their relations, and inside of their leadership, because they're still chasing a result. They're chasing an outcome. And they're forgetting the sacred laws of co-creation. And you can't just get obsessed with the sacred laws of co-creation and forget about the one who created them, the Most High. And so when I remembered who I was and returned to my center, it was as if God started to reorganize every particle in my being, the atoms, the cells, the tissues, the neural pathways, my nervous system. They were reorganized into spiritual alignment. And some miraculous things began to unfold inside of my life, inside of my marriage, inside of my feminine leadership. And it was such a beautiful reminder about the importance of the being and the doing, about I'm not a human doer. I'm a human being. And my self-trust got fractured in that choice point in my business where I was trying to go ahead of God and chase for an outcome because I was in a human doing mode. I wasn't in a human being mode. And when we're in a human being mode, we are connected to our body temple. We can feel the yes and the no in our body. We can be attuned to the Almighty and receive that divine guidance and insight that supports us as our compass even though it may make logical sense to go right. And Creator says, no, my daughter, go right or go left instead. We listen and we follow because we know ultimately God knows best. There's a saying I like to say that I do my best, I let God do the rest. And that is when supernatural miracles unfold. But when I'm trying to do it all on my lonesome and I leave God out, I experience a mess. I'm sure you can relate. We've all been there. And so when we are having this experience of an identity level initiation, self-trust has been fractured. In whatever way, there's been times where my self-trust has been fractured because I knew what I had discerned in another. As a prophetess, as a seer, as a mystical woman with many supernatural spiritual gifts, I have a lot of beautiful gifts God has given me, and I can see in the unseen. I can hear beneath the words. I can perceive and know motives and intentions beneath the surface, and it tends to frighten and scare people who want to come and manipulate because I can see through it. However, those who love truth and those who love pure power and alignment, they're here for it. They're my truth tellers. They're my truth speakers. They love that I'm the way I am because they know I'm going to give it to them straight and I'm going to keep it real. And sometimes when we're on this path of deeper initiation, going into the descent of our soul to excavate what was never meant to be there, and we are facing some unpleasant truths about ourselves, we have to be willing to be the truth teller to ourselves. We have to be willing to see ourselves. And it's not always easy. It's not always easy to see I co-created this experience outside of myself. This friend betrayed me, but I betrayed myself. This business partner betrayed me, but I betrayed myself. This colleague backstabbed me, but I backstabbed myself first because I knew before I knew. My body said no, and my mouth said yes. I went against what I was being led and guided to do because the egoic need to get to a certain destination, to get a certain result, to feel good enough, to prove ourselves, for some faux sense of validation, to try to outwork the inner work. We have to be willing to do the unpleasant work to experience the pleasant rewards, the pleasant outcomes, the pleasant ideal experiences we deeply desire. You can't bypass this part. It doesn't matter where you're at in your evolution, how long you've been married, how long you've been in business or in your career, how much money you've made, how much wealth you've created. There are always paths of ascension upon us when we are the type of women who are on a lifelong path of evolution, transformation, of growth. And so these points where we are hurrying and rushing and trying to go ahead of God, and we're turning our gaze outward and external, those are all signals and signs that an identity initiation is near. Those are all signals and signs that it is time for your next evolution. Those are all signals and signs that you are being sequestered by God for a season of alteration. And when we are navigating these experiences, when we try to just look at it from a surface level lens of, well, this is what I did, so I'm going to stop doing that and do this instead, but we don't do a root cause analysis of, why is there this version of me that tends to grab the ladle from God and start stirring the pot? Why is there this version of me that likes to get in the driver's seat rather, and take over the wheel and drive? What is it about this version of me that has this need to be in control? We must diagnose that, and we must look at that, and we must examine that. And by doing so, we can start to see how these acquired versions of ourselves have been operating behind the scenes, covertly. And sometimes it's creating sabotage. Sometimes it's creating misalignment. Sometimes it's creating false timelines. Sometimes it's causing even some ambitious, well-intentioned, well-meaning feminine leaders to borrow someone else's identity because they're hoping that that's going to get them the result that they want. If I start behaving like her in my marriage, then my beloved will adore me and cherish me and romance me. If I start behaving like she does in my leadership, then I will get the respect that I want and I know deep down I deserve. If I start behaving like she does in her business, then maybe I'll create the impact and the income that I know deep down I'm capable of. But when you borrow someone else's identity and beingness, that is a form and an act of self-betrayal. And it won't be long until life mirrors to you that which you have created within yourself. And it does not feel good to have that experience. That soul shock that comes inside of our experience to jolt us into presence, to jolt us out of these paradigms, jolt us into an initiation. And when we have the courage and the willingness to be with ourselves, we can start to tend and mend and uproot what was never meant to be planted there to begin with. And this is how we start to restore our feminine self-trust. The systems of the world benefit off of ambitious feminine women and leaders being disconnected from our body temple and from betraying ourselves, because then we betray each other. And then when we are fighting amongst each other or being catty amongst each other, we're not co-creating the realities that our destiny preordained for us to do on this planet. However, when we are trusting our body temple and we're trusting our no's and our yeses and our body temple, and we honor that, and our self-trust is connected with Creator and that guidance, that divine intelligence, I believe this is how we create heaven on earth in this lifetime. I believe this is how we, as women, shift from over-functioning to overflowing. And we experience abundance and peace and ease and joy and radiance and vitality and aliveness, where we are turned on by our own energy and we are turned on by life, where our relations and our marriages are better than the beginning, where we are leading and creating ripples of impact that outlives us. We're creating a legacy. And in order to do all of that and to experience all of that, we have to be in full trust of us. And by doing so, we receive that supernatural divine guidance from Creator and we follow it. Even when it doesn't make logical sense. Even when we don't have the full picture in front of us. Even when we don't have a blueprint or a roadmap, because we're walking the path. We move one foot in front of the other because we know God would not tell us to do something or to not do something if there were not a divine reason for it, which is one thing I love about God's grace, God's infinite grace, heaven's grace. When we get under heaven's grace, there's this analogy I've been saying to a client recently about heaven is hovering over us, always ready to infiltrate our system with guidance, with grace. And it is when we close ourselves up that we don't receive that, but it's always there and available. And when we open ourselves up to heaven's grace and to God's guidance, what seems like delay suddenly becomes a destiny plot twist. And the misaligned steps that we thought took us so far off track, that we're so behind and we're gonna miss the mark and it's too late, our Maker already knew about. It was already pre-written. That God isn't gonna hold us against us. There's grace for our humanity. There is grace for our misalignment. There is grace when we mess up. There is grace when we make a mistake. There is grace when we don't get it right the first time. God's grace is sufficient for us, and it covers us beyond what we could ever imagine or think or ask or pray for. And when we are under God's grace, our destiny timeline gets realigned. It's almost as if that GPS, that supernatural GPS, comes on and says, make the U-turn here. And suddenly, what you thought was going to take you 4 days or 4 weeks or 4 hours or 4 years, a U-turn gets you there swiftly. This is what many call collapsing time and quantum leaping. I like to say this is destiny timeline course correction. And when we are back on track on our destiny timeline, the floodgates of heaven open, and we start to experience and receive more than we could have ever asked for, where we have, the scripture says, where you don't even have room enough to receive abundance, provision, support, love, peace that surpasses human logic and understanding. And so I often like to say, and I've been saying this for years, that there are no such thing as a wasted experience. When you take the lesson learned and you apply it to your life or to your love or to your leadership, Even when we make a mistake, even when we mess up, even when we find ourselves in some type of misalignment, God's grace is sufficient. God's grace covers us. If I shared something that resonated with you and you feel that you are navigating an identity initiation in this season of your womanhood or in your relations or in your leadership or all the above, and you know receiving supernatural support, divine guidance is the aligned path for you, I have a couple of options that you can explore. What is available for the public is my 90-minute recalibration intensive. You will receive a holistic assessment that you complete. You return it a minimum of 48 hours prior to our scheduled time, our session, and I will customize your intensive and your experience so that we are realigning your soul, we are refining your power, we are reattuning your nervous system, we are recalibrating you on an identity level so that you are navigating your experiences in your life, love, and leadership from that place of power, of self-trust, of inner knowing, of peace and ease. And you're walking with God, not trying to go ahead of God. You're walking with Creator. If you know spiritual alignment is paramount on this path that you are on, self-actualization, then I invite you to book that session. You can reach out to me. There's information somewhere, wherever this is posted, of how you can reach out to book that session. And there is integration support that follows that intensive. If you are looking for community and a group space, I do have some options available, one that is forthcoming and one that is enrolling currently. You can simply reach out and I can share more about the group spaces that I have available. In this season, I'm being a bit more selective about who I invite into my spaces because of spiritual alignment. And I want to ensure that I am co-creating containers that is for the good of all. If you know someone who would find value in receiving this transmission and listening to this, then if you share this, I would really appreciate it. And I'll share more information wherever this is shared about additional ways you can connect with me. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for your time today. And I look forward to future conversations together. Take care now.